Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this program today, we'll be discussing how we can find creative ways to challenge not only church replacement theology, but also Jew hatred in the church today. And in this program today, I'm joined by Steve Maltz, who's an award-winning author and a passionate supporter of Israel and the Jewish people. So Steve, we've known each other for a long time, and our paths have crossed on a number of occasions. We have a mutual good friendship with Robin Benson, but I must apologise that you haven't been on the Middle East Report sooner and you're making your debut. But do you want to share with us your kind of remarkable story of faith? Growing up in what people have described as a kind of secular Jewish family, and then finding Yeshua. Just share with us your childhood growing up in a secular Jewish home.
Yeah, it's not that remarkable. I imagine most people have a similar testimony. But yeah, my parents were not religious. We did Passovers once a year. We didn't do Shabbat. Jewish food, Yiddish, all the usual stuff. Jewish comedians, and very much aware of our culture. It was quite interesting because I didn't have many Jewish friends, and that was because my mum and dad wanted me to do so well at my bar mitzvah that I had a private rabbi, which meant I didn't go to the yeshiva or the school, the Saturday school. So I never met any Jewish people. So I actually really grew up in a Gentile environment. Didn't have many Jewish friends. After my bar mitzvah, it was like that was enough. I could move on. I've done all the Jewish stuff. I can then stop being Jewish in a sense. So I was a little bit of a rebel during my teenage years, and then I hit university, and then it all changed.
Yeah, so share with us what happened at university, coming into contact with many Christians who probably no doubt challenged your faith in
it wasn't as noble as that. I have to say, I was part of a chemistry group. There's only 8 of us in our class, and there was one girl, and basically I fell for her. And she was a Christian, born again, proper born again, which I've never heard of before. I didn't know anything about Jesus, never read the New Testament. But in the last term of the last year, suddenly we became an item, totally out of the blue. But she said nothing could happen because there was a third person, this invisible Jesus. And that set me off on this quest. It was sort of tied up a little bit with my feelings for her, but eventually it took over, and it sent me on lots of adventures because I was reading the New Testament for the first time. If I remember, the Good News Bible at the time, so very simple stuff. Then I went to Israel. I went to work on the kibbutz, and then God just gave me lots of incidences of meeting people. Christians, Baha'is, Orthodox Jews, all sorts, and it all became part of my story. Took time to come through though, and this is the thing, because when I came back from Israel, I knew that Christianity was true in my head, but to go from head to heart took me 10 years, because when I got picked up at the airport coming back from Israel, my dad picked me up as a taxi driver. He said something, he must have had a word of prophecy as an atheist, because he said, I hope you haven't become one of those Christians. And immediately I said, no, of course not. And that sort of put a curse on myself, because I realised that for them, that was the most important thing, that I don't become a Christian. And then I realised that gave me such a fear, because we were a very close family, that I would lose them. So it never happened. In the end, I married a Christian girl, and we went on a joint quest to get closer to the heart of Jesus, and I came through, but it took 10 years.
Yeah, just share with us, because a lot of our viewers don't fully understand how difficult it is to be a messianic believer in Yeshua, or a Jewish believer in Messiah Yeshua, primarily because you feel kind of rejected from mainstream Jewish community, and then you're not accepted on behalf of the kind of main majority of the church, and you have a kind of Hebraic mindset and understanding of scriptures, and then you find yourself in church and finding that the vast majority of Christians can't relate to you or understand your position. So how do you bring the two together? Well,
first I have to say, just to remind you, I came from a secular background, so a lot of Christians who knew my Jewish background thought, oh, here we have an expert in the Old Testament, and I'll be sitting in church and they'll be saying something and say, Steve, did we get that right? And I thought, I don't know. So it doesn't naturally mean that you have a thorough knowledge. But the funny thing is, I got through on scraps. I got through on knowledge of the Hebrew alphabet. That got me through to lots of interesting situations, including writing a book about Hebrew, just from the knowledge of the alphabet. And people read that book, and it's called God's Signature, and it's done very well, and people think I'm a biblical Hebrew expert, but I'm not. So basically, I fudged through. So to answer your questions, everything was a little bit of a fudge. I don't really call myself a Messianic Jew. I would rather make my faith Jesus-centered, so I call myself a biblical Christian. Which is maybe a bit unusual, but people know that I've got a Jewish background. But we come under so many names, Messianic Jew, completed Jew, Hebraic Christian, and all this stuff. But why can't we be the same as anyone else? Because it doesn't imply that you have any. That's the thing. A lot of Christians put us on a pedestal, and if you can be put on a pedestal, you can be knocked off it as well. So I'd rather not be on that pedestal, and just do what I can from what God has given me, basically.
Excellent. And also share with us, for example, the gift that God's given you, and that is the gift of writing. Yeah. When did you become aware that God had given you this gift? And did it change once you became a believer in Yeshua? Because you've written 39 books, you're a prolific author, and it's almost like you roll a book out every 6 months.
Yeah, no, two in the last 6 months.
Oh, well, there you go, apologise.
But when you say when I was aware that God gave me, well, I was 5 when I started writing. I don't think I knew who God was at that time. But I knew when I became a proper believer in 1986, I was already writing stuff, but in an amateur way. Though I'd run a software house, I'd written lots of computer games. I was part of the home computing boom, and I did a lot of games that did quite well at that time. And that was a lot of writing. But in fact, I did Christian games before I was a Christian. I did the first Christian game in this country.
And what was that again?
In fact, it was written by a Baptist minister from Seven Kings, I've forgotten, Reverend Goodlad. And I saw him on a BBC programme, so I contacted him, and I ended up publishing his book called Jericho Road for the Sinclair Spectrum.
Oh, amazing. Well, going back to the 80s.
Yeah, back to the 83, 84, yeah.
Wow.
So I was doing Christian stuff before I was a Christian. So I think God he was already pushing me, even at that early time. So
excellent. So in about 2002, you wrote an article called "The Idiot's Guide to the Middle East Conflict." Yes. Share with us how God moved you from writing certain books on faith and theology, really kind of moving into the Israeli-Arab conflict to bring understanding to Christians about not only the kind of geostrategic influences, but also essentially the biblical understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel.
Because that book was simply the history. It wasn't a book. It was just a leaflet which CFI got hold of, and I think they sold thousands of them. And they're still selling it. That was just that came about through a pact that I made with God on a sewer bank near Plaistow. I was struggling to write. I wanted to be a writer. I was so desperate to be a writer in the secular world, even though I was a Christian. I just wanted to be out there. So I was writing screenplays and all sorts of stuff, and almost having success, but never quite doing that. And then that was the time of the Second Intifada. And God put on my heart to write something that explained people what was the history of the conflict, because it was very confusing. So I wrote this Idiot's Guide. And I said, and God said, you had a choice. You could, if you wrote something that's close to his heart, he would make it successful. That led to my first book, The Land of Many Names, and that was my first Christian book, published by called Authentic Media. And thanks to Joseph Steinberg, who you might know, he was one that was pushing me at the time, working for Jews for Jesus then, and that was the start. That was the start of my writing career. So my very first book, there was another one, but that's not really relevant to this story. I wrote one for youth leaders, but I've no idea why. I just someone approached me and I just wanted to write. I don't care what. So as a writer, I don't care what I write. It's what God puts in my heart. So out of the 7 books I've written, there's no real trend. It's anything what God has told me to write, I would write. So it's not just about Israel, though maybe about 4 or 5 have been about Israel, but quite a lot about the church and what's gone wrong with the church. Again, which is probably not relevant to this discussion. But
no, we also did I think quite recently a book trying to navigating our way through the COVID pandemic as well, and the response to the church to that as well. So you say that God influences you in your book, but also where else do you get kind of inspiration to write a certain book, and whether it's kind of non-fiction or whether it's a work of fiction like we would be discussing shortly.
If I could answer that, I could bottle it and make a lot of money. But honestly, I don't know the inspiration. I have to say, because I decided that everything I do will be for God's glory, that I have to honestly say that I could sit there and start writing and not know what I'm writing until I write it. Because he not just give me the words, but finding the connections, maybe an internet article or someone would phone me up or talk to someone, and it all comes together. And that's when I know that he's behind it. And that's how I write all my books. So I don't know where it comes from, except the Lord is there.
Amen. And Steve, when it comes to kind of theology on Israel, why do you think so much of the church has got it so wrong on Israel, that they believe in the lies of church replacement theology or supersession theology, particularly because you've written so many books on this topic, and of course it's very personal to you as well. So share with us from your perspective why so many Christians get caught up in this deception.
Yeah, I must say, when I first became a believer, it was such a mystery to me that, I was coming as a Jewish believer, wasn't pushing my Jewishness that much at the beginning, but to really understand. I remember going to Greenbelt, quite interesting, the Christian, it's gone a bit dodgy now, but it wasn't that dodgy then, slightly dodgy. And as a Jew, almost a believer, I was almost a believer, and in line with Romans 11, what I saw made me jealous, because I felt that I couldn't be a part of all these Gentiles that are doing all this Christian stuff and finding hope and understanding. It's almost like I couldn't be a part of it. So I was brought into the idea that my Jewish background meant that I couldn't actually be a believer. That's how I actually felt right at the beginning. So I had to get over that, and that's obviously a result of replacement theology and the idea that the Jews have blown it, or the Jews have their own covenant and stick to your Judaism, that will do you, So very quickly I got to understand that there was a lot of bad stuff there. And my first book that came out of that Idiot's Guide was called Land of Many Names. That's when I actually went into replacement theology in that book. I can't exactly remember what I wrote, because it was 20 years ago. But I did realise that it's very much historical. It goes right back to the founding, or the church fathers. It went from then onwards. As soon as the Jewish generation died out of disciples and apostles and the Gentiles came in, that's when it started going downhill right from the start. And as I was researching, I couldn't believe that other people didn't know this stuff. I was reading about Marcion and writing about him when at a time when no one was talking about Marcion, and yet you see Marcion, which is, he was like a first century sort of Christian, but a heretic. And he's the one that sort of make a division between the Old Testament and the New Testament, the people of the Old Testament, people of the New Testament, and the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament. He had a division between the two. And that's exactly what anyone that goes into replacement theology, they're into the Marcion. They're degrading the Old Testament, they're degrading the Jews are part of the Old. And even the God of the Old, we've got this bright, shiny, new, Messiah called Jesus, and he looks like a Gentile, he acts like a Gentile. The New Testament is the only thing you need to read, and that was what I was up against a lot. We're talking about 20 years ago in the church. I can't say I was particularly a campaigner to change things. I just wrote stuff as I saw it and as I researched, but interestingly, when that book came out, Land of Many Names, it was thanks to Revelation TV, Howard and the others, because it was promoted. Someone did an advert for me, and must have sold 2,000 or 3,000 as a result of Revelation TV. So thank you for that.
Well,
you weren't around then, but
no, I wasn't. Well, I was around then, but I wasn't involved in the channel. I think. I did meet you actually working in the Great Portland Street in the very small studios and offices there back in 2003, 2004 time. But also just kind of unpack for us why, for example, so many Christians are led astray by church replacement theology or supersession theology, believing that all the promises referring to Israel and the Jewish people now refer to the church without actually reading the Bible for themselves and coming to their own kind of biblical understanding purely on the literal text of their own.
There's a simple answer to that, and that's anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is just so divisive and so subtle, is that people don't realise that they have it. And that's at the heart. It's like they want to hate and they want to degrade the Jews. They want it because it's something that's inside them. So if they find a philosophy or theology that seems to agree with that, they'll follow it. So that's why, particularly in this country, the replacement theology is the default sort of theological position. And for me, it ties in with the fact that, look what's happened since October the 7th. Has the church in this country woken up to it? Has the church got behind Israel? Hasn't. And despite this obvious explosion of anti-Semitism in this culture, it doesn't seem to be, that the church doesn't seem to be speaking into it and setting itself up as an example, which basically means the church still has a problem.
But also, doesn't it mean also the church is spiritual blind to God's plans and purposes in the nation? Because literally what we've seen since the re-establishment of the modern state of Israel back on the 14th of May 1948 is literally Bible prophecy, ancient Bible prophecies coming alive in our day, and that is the nation of Israel is God's prophetic time clock. And really Israel, and knowing the hostilities and the difficulties in the Middle East, should never have survived a week after its independence.
How
but
can you
miraculously,
not see it?
Israel has, and yet the scriptures talk about the Jewish people coming back from the four corners of the earth, from the former Soviet Union to South Africa to the United States, from this country, and that's in the scriptures. So surely, how from someone who takes a position that God has finished with Israel and the Jewish people can't understand what God is doing through the nations?
Because you said it's a blockage. There's a blockage, and it's almost like, for me, it seems it's the same blockage that a non-believer has. That they're stopping the Holy Spirit from illuminating them. It's a sense that we still have to evangelise the church on this issue, because until they get rid of that blockage, I don't think the church is going to flourish in this country. I think, we talk about Genesis 12:3, the curses, and look what happened to the Archbishop. We know it was all because of the woke stuff that he'd bought into, but it was mainly, his disparaging of Israel, Netanyahu. Just a few weeks after that, some of us write a letter when it gets published in Premier Radio, and it gets sent to him, telling him to be a bit more biblical. He doesn't respond, and a few weeks later he's out. I mean, obviously there was another reason why, ostensibly why he was kicked out or why he resigned, but there's no precedent to it for an archbishop to leave his post. So, to me, that points to Israel. It points to anti-Semitism as a force that's still there, corrupting our society. It corrupted
the church as well.
Yeah, and the church as well. I mean, even in society, there are two examples I use. One is in politics, the general election. The general election was so influenced by anti-Semitism. You end up with, I think, at least 5, including Jeremy Corbyn, 5 candidates who came in just on the Gaza thing. But there are other examples where I'm in Ilford North. Wes Streeting is our MP. Now, Wes Streeting, as you know, is the health minister.
Yeah, health minister.
When I came here to speak to you all those years ago, was it 4 or 5 years ago, you dragged me in on the Labour and anti-Semitism, which I knew nothing about, but thank goodness that Robin was there to be my spokesman. But the thing is that Jeremy Corbyn, the only person that really called him out was Wes Streeting. when he was a backbencher. And so what's happened to Wes is that he had quite a big majority originally. So when this general election came to be, the Muslims in our area, and there's a lot of them, have moved into the northern part of our borough. They put their own candidate up, a young Muslim girl, and conducted a very nasty campaign against Wes Streeting because of the things he said about Israel and about the Jewish people. And ours was the borough where they had Palestinian flags everywhere, on the lampposts and outside the polling booths and all sorts. And he only scraped by. He went down from 5,000 majority to 500, but he got in. But that shows you how anti-Semitism had got in. And the other thing was the Eurovision Song Contest, which I'm sure you've talked about before, but how, just ignoring the church, society should see that this force of anti-Semitism is disrupting everything. You can't walk the streets in London on a Saturday, even if you're not Jewish, without some sort of disruption of all the hundreds of thousands that are out there. And anti-Semitism, it's nothing about love for the Palestinians. It's about hate for the Jews, and I write about that in the book, and I got into trouble for doing that, and that's another story.
No, good. I'm glad you got in trouble for that. but also, share with us how the kind of Lord led you a month prior to the horrors of October the 7th to kind of prepare you to write about Israel and Gaza and Hamas, because that was a huge game changer back then.
Yeah, it was. I didn't know it at the time. In September that year, I had prophetic words spoken over me by a sort of professional intercessor, and it was New Beginnings. So I was already writing a book that had nothing to do with Israel and all that. And they prayed over me, and two of them said the same thing, New Beginnings. 3 days after, this is where the incredible thing comes. So 3 days after, I was driving in the car, and as I hit the M25, I looked out my window, and there were two clouds in the sky, and they were Hebrew letters. And I've got a photograph of it, I can prove this.
Which Hebrew letters?
Right, Aleph and Zion. I wasn't sure about the Zion at the time. I photographed it, and when I got home, and what I'm saying is there were no other clouds.
So Aleph is the first one, so kind of A.
Yeah, that's right. And
Zion is more of an I, isn't it?
It's got a lump at the top and the stalk and whatever.
Good description.
And so I photographed it, though I was driving, but there you go. And I showed it to people afterwards. It followed me along the whole M25. And when I got back home, I phoned someone up, and it wasn't a word, there was no word with those two letters, but numerically, they actually added up to 8, which was New Beginnings. It was exactly the same word that I had 3 days earlier. So I knew something was coming. I knew that God was going to pull me into something new. And just 2 or 3 weeks afterwards was October the 7th. Everything changed, and the name of the book, Now Everything Changes, everything changed for me. Since then, virtually everything I've done has been working towards trying to give people an understanding of what's going on, and not just writing books, but podcasts and articles and all sorts of stuff. So God's motivated me, to do this.
But share with us your thoughts. When did you first become aware of the horrors that were unfolding in southern Israel when Hamas carried out the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history, murdered over 1,200 Israelis and foreign nationals, and injured between 6,000 and 7,000 Israelis as well, took 250 hostages, and then just caused absolute devastation in southern Israel. And having been to southern Israel and seen those kibbutzes that were destroyed, it is apocalyptic. And it was something like a kind of mini Holocaust that actually took place that day.
You actually went there then?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I haven't actually been, but like everyone else, I just, it was a news flash, and from that first news, you had to watch it for the rest of the time. And as a Jewish person, it was extremely, very emotional, not just for me, but other people, Messianic Gentiles that I know. It was a real shock to the system. But in my case, I knew I had to do something about it, because as someone who writes and as a communicator, and if God's calling me into doing this, it gives me that responsibility. It's been a really difficult time. because, I don't sleep very well, and, I have all sorts of problems, but I just know that God has, and He's given me really good people around me to help me and to pray for me and to intercede for me. But I have, produced quite a lot of stuff, and but it's forced me to go on rally. I went to the first pro-Palestinian rally in Hyde Park. Ooh. I had to go there. I knew I had to be there, so I went there an hour early, and they were setting their stalls out. And the people who were setting their stalls out were the Socialist Workers' Party, Stop the War Coalition. It was the Marxists that were running the show. Even all the banners that were being held, all the pro-Palestinian banners, all had the words Socialist Workers' Party. They would produce it and giving it to the Muslims. So the Muslims were there, but they've been manipulated so much. And I saw Muslim families there, whole family groups, who I felt were there because they felt they had to be there, because maybe they would be, told off for not being there. I don't know. I think there was a little bit of coercion in some cases, but the atmosphere of hate that was drummed up by the chanting and from the river to the sea and lots of other things was when I realised that we'd got something. I mean, this was back in November last year, and that's when I realised that, and that's why I had to write this book. You just got people. You got to realise that hatred is not healthy. These people, and I'm not thinking about those who have got a stake in it, like the Palestinians or even the far left, but out of the 100,000 people, maybe 90,000 of them have come along because it's the trendy thing to do. Those people, they don't know what they've let into their spirits, the hatred that and there are other places I went to where I saw it even worse than that, and and I feel sorry for these people. I shouldn't do. I feel sorry for the Hamas terrorists because they've been brought up they've been from the cradle. They've been brought up in an atmosphere of such hate. In a sense, they've been trapped for their education system and
But they're still responsible for their actions,
absolutely.
Because I've seen the not only have I been to Kibbutz Nir Oz that was destroyed by Hamas on October the 7th, I also visited one of 3 car parks that hold 1,200 cars, mainly from the Nova Music Festival, and these cars were kind of full of bullet holes and people's belongings in them. And then when you see the Hamas video cams from their own bodies and the CCTV cameras that the Israeli embassy is showing, you put that all together, and it is absolutely beyond horrific. And the big difference between them and the Nazis is the Nazis struggled to deal with it. That's why they got drunk at night, but the Hamas were rejoicing in it and delighting in killing Jews.
And they were brought up to,
and that's the sheer horror of it. But out of that, we have this unprecedented rise of Jew hatred that has emerged. And having been walking through one of the pro-Palestinian rallies back in October, the end of October, so literally a couple of weeks after the horrors of October the 7th, literally felt like you were at one of those Nazi Nuremberg rallies where you could see hatred rise, and not many white faces, but absolutely full of hatred. And I was a bit fearful myself getting caught up in that. But there is something, as you were saying, that is a spirit that takes hold of people, that when they allow that satanic spirit of Jew hatred to take hold of their hearts, it is all-consuming and all-destroying.
It is.
And that's the danger.
And I think, and honestly, I think we have to take responsibility, those of us who know and understand the spiritual background, that we have to help people to come out of that. So the stuff that I'm writing now, the book that I'm actually researching at the moment is specifically for those people that go to those rallies and don't know why they're there. And they've been sucked into this hatred and they don't know why.
And there's a huge naivety there as well. So let's have a look at this excellent CBN report that does show one of the remarkable stories of a very resilient kibbutz in southern Israel that actually survived the horrors of October the 7th, because clearly God's hand of protection was on this community.
Ein Habazor is a small farming community just 4 miles from Gaza. As Hamas terrorists invaded on October 7th, this village became an unlikely stronghold of resistance.
We realized for the first second that this is something different. We took the kids to the shelter, and then the chief of security sent us a text message go to the fence, to the gate, to defend our people, they're invading to Israel.
Pretty much every single kibbutz and small village around Israel has one of these big yellow security gates at the entrance, and most of the time they stay open, but the Hamas terrorists took advantage of that fact on October 7th by bringing jamming devices that wouldn't let people close those gates. And a split-second decision on the part of the guard at Ein Habazor probably saved hundreds of lives. As the attack unfolded, villagers found themselves drastically outgunned.
My brother was the only one with the rifle that time in the front gate when they came. They came with a pickup full of terrorists and motorcycles, and they came fully armed. It wasn't just a terror attack, there was a military operation.
When Gebner's brother was shot in the shoulder, Yiftach knew he had to get to a hospital. So he loaded him in his car and sped out the back gate, right into a waiting squad of terrorists.
We saw the ambush of 2 pickups and several motorcycles with a bunch, about 30 terrorists, that start massive shooting on the car. My brother was hit for the second time in his hip and in his belly, several bullets. All the windows was exploding. I managed to drive in reverse. We managed to escape.
Remarkably, no one from Ein Habazor was killed or kidnapped that day. The village's preparedness played a crucial role in their defense.
Chief of Security sent us a text message, they're invading, go out. We already had a group of 70 people that went out without even asking any question. Now it's a different story. Now we have enough rifle, enough handguns, anything we need to independently defend ourselves if there will be a situation like that.
Now, months later, the village is rebuilding and growing stronger.
Now, we are September 1st, this is the beginning of the school year, there are about 85% of the people that came back.
This resilience isn't just about security. It's about building a thriving community in the face of adversity.
We are opening a new sports center here in the Moshav. We're just going to be stronger because there is no other option that we're going to leave this piece of land, this beautiful piece of land, without having our people here.
For Dr. Gebner and his neighbors, the events of October 7th have only strengthened their resolve.
Israel was established after the Holocaust with zero chance to establish the country. We survived the 67 war, the 73 war. Look at where we are now, when we have a strong, maybe the strongest army relative to the size of the population. We're going to win this war. There's not even a question. Keep that in mind. Israel will just be stronger following October 7th.
From Israel, I'm Chuck Olton for CBN News.
A credible survival story there from October the 7th, thanks to our friends at CBN. And yes, Israel is stronger and is emerging victorious from the horrors of October the 7th. Steve, you've written this book, which is called Now Everything Changes, One Man's Search for the Truth in a World Gone Mad. It looks like the Lake District, but with a Palestinian flag and a man in a hat looking on. Yeah. And just share with us about why you or the Lord led you to write this book, particularly in a novel format, looking in the aftermath of October the 7th.
It was triggered off by a friend of mine, David, who went to Ulverston in the Lake District, and he actually saw the Palestinian flag. So you can actually, he had the full flag then, not the, and he knew that it was a pleasure spot, and it was quite close to the coast, so it could be seen by boats out there. So it was put there deliberately to have the maximum visibility. He was so appalled, he photographed it and he sent it to me, and I had this book written in 7 days.
Wow.
It just hit me, and I thought, that is an angle. And the angle that I wanted, I knew that I could write books as many people do. Most of the books are like textbooks, they're non-fiction. And I thought the best way to get people's hearts is fiction. And the Lord had been training me over the year before to writing fiction. I was writing screenplays, left, right and centre, really getting into how writing dialogue and character building and all that. So it was very easy for me to create these 2 characters, Derek and Dawn, middle-aged, white, non-Christian, non-Jewish. They go to the Lake District, see this flag. They didn't even know it's a Palestinian flag. They're that naive. And it starts them off this great search for truth. So the two of them, they go to rallies. They go to a pro-Israel rally, pro-Palestinian rally. They talk to Muslims. They talk to Jews. They go to a Messianic fellowship. They go to a high church. They just meet, and the idea is that as they're going on their search, they're being talked to by people. In fact, one's called Podcast Steve, which is me, because I do a podcast. My name's Steve, so I'm actually in this book, and my wife's in it as well. There's a few people can identify themselves, but what Steve tells them is look for the truth. Just keep going and find the truth, and then act on it. That's the theme all the way through the book. And what they're discovering is, they are discovering what I'm hoping that people would discover, is that what anti-Semitism, which is at the heart of all this, it's just so weird and non-explanatory that there must be something outside of our experience that's involved in all this. So they start looking, and they don't become believers. It will become a bit too, bit of a cliche of suddenly, hallelujah, we're believers.
That's for the sequel.
Yeah, no, I've done the sequel and they're not believers then either.
Okay, that's for the third in the series.
Maybe the third one. But they, particularly Dawn, the lady, she gets an understanding and she knows that they're on a bit of a spiritual quest. And what happens then, so that's 2/3 of the book. The last third hits you between the eyes, because it's the stuff that, if I had it in a book by itself, no one would read it because it's a condemnation of why the church doesn't get Israel. So it's about the realities of anti-Semitism, why the church has got it wrong, for me, it's the biggest apologetic for God is the Jews. So the story of, was it King Frederick II of Prussia?
Yes.
With his doctor, you've probably heard it hundreds of times. Explain God in one sentence: the Jews, Your Majesty. And that's right, even more so now, and the thing that I put this in all my books, and God gave me this revelation years ago, but it's such a straightforward one. It's the idea that the Jews have been around for so long, thousands of years, and no one else has survived from those times except the Jews. You don't see any Moabites going around, or Jebusites and this site and that.
Egyptians.
Or Egyptians.
Ancient Greeks, Romans.
Yeah, well,
Soviets, Nazis,
whatever. And the Jews are still around, but no people group have been so persecuted than any other group. Why are the Jews still around, despite so many different ways of wiping them out and whatever? And the answer is so simple, is that there are two powers, one that's keeping them alive and the other one that's trying to kill them. And the one that's keeping them alive, which is God, is the stronger one, and he will prevail. And for me, it can only point to spiritual forces. And for me, that should be an apologetic that the church, trouble is the church doesn't get it itself, does it? If the church doesn't get it, how can they evangelize with it? But I certainly can, and so could you. And the book does. And this book is having an effect on people, even Jewish people. And there's a synagogue in Plymouth, apparently, that have, quite a lot of them have read this book, and it's pointing them to the way,
That's amazing, because Jew hatred is completely irrational.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
No.
When you look at if we take, for example, the Jewish community in this country, their contribution to British life, in terms of business, in terms of finance, in terms of art, in terms of education, in terms of literacy, it's colossal. Science as well, technology. For a small ethnic group, they have they've won more Nobel Peace Prizes than anyone else.
25%.
More scientific awards than anyone else. They are the brains of a nation. And when, for example, they depart a nation, then that intellect, that blessing that was with them just falls apart. So surely when people actually look at what the Jewish people do, particularly how they are so interested in Kol Ha'olam, changing the world and making it a better place, they make our country better. They make the world better. And yet, when we look at the nation of Israel, it's a beacon of light in a very, very dark region of the world. And yet Israel is blamed for everything. The Jews are blamed for everything. And I suppose the big difference between previous conflicts that Israel's been involved in, October the 7th was different because the unprecedented wave of Jew hatred that emerged in the aftermath of October the 7th was horrific. And Jewish people were being blamed for Israel's actions, even though Israel didn't actually send any Israeli troops into Gaza to take on Hamas until the end of October.
They were demonstrating the next day in New York and London, I think, that even before Israel even thought about how to retaliate. But it was just there anti-Semitism is waiting there under the surface, and it's just found this way to break in. And you know, if we want to call the devil clever, this is quite clever that he's managed to do this, unfortunately. But then it does bring it to the surface, and because it's at the surface, people, I think, suddenly aware that it's there and wondering why it's there. Any sensible person, and there are plenty out there who don't have an axe to grind, who are not believers, who are not, you know, some people like Douglas Murray, for instance, you know, he's totally obsessed by it because he can see there's just no rationalism behind it at all. And, you know, people wouldn't survive, you know, anyone who's anti-Jewish wouldn't survive more than a minute with him in a room, because the arguments, you cannot have any counter arguments that make sense.
I did have the pleasure of knowing quite a few years ago and having a few coffee meetings with him as well.
Oh, well done. Yeah.
His intellect is incredible, but it also stems from his love for the Jewish people and a kind of recognition of what the Jewish people have done and what they've offered him personally and what Israel kind of represents, and he gets that deeply. And that's kind of, it expresses itself in the incredible arguments he's able to put forward to demolish essentially Israel's enemies and just really tear them to pieces. But there is a fundamental problem, but it's also when it comes to Jew hatred, because in a sense, this is satanic. There is no doubt that Jew hatred is satanic, but God's also used it as a preservative to preserve the Jewish people. So it meant that they've never been fully integrated into society. They have in the States. I think the United States is the only country, similar to ours, where we see that the Jewish people are fully integrated into American society. And is it any wonder that America became a superpower? Because the Jewish people, ever since George Washington became president and some Jewish financiers financed his war campaign for independence against the British, once he gained independence, he rewarded that by giving key cabinet posts. I think the post of the Secretary of State for Finance to leading members of the Jewish community. He wrote an acceptance letter to the Jewish community, and ever since then, American Jews have always felt assimilated into American life and society, and this is probably why America has flourished like no other nation this world has known, because they've accepted the Jewish people. But the opposite is true, isn't it? That when nations that hate the Jewish people come against the Jewish people, it brings a curse and a destruction upon them.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think I might have mentioned earlier about universities. So Columbia University in America, New York, one of the worst places for Jew hatred. It just makes you wonder, because New York has so many Jews, but that place has, I think, there's a demonic element there that goes way back 100 years, and that's a separate story. But you know, the whole idea of academia. I mean, I was walking past when I was researching the book, I was walking past UCL and King's College, and you know, they've all got Palestinian villages there, and you know, and it's just. It's a trendy thing to do, to be anti-Semitic, and the disguise is that they care so much for Palestinians. But if they cared for the Palestinians, they'd want to get rid of Hamas, you know, basically, because we know that the mechanisms by which Palestinians are getting killed. So there is no real love there. So I have to tell you a story, because I actually. Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, I'm sure viewers love. Well, you're an author, you're a storyteller. Right. You have to tell us a story.
Well, it's a true story. So every year I go to something called CRT. In fact, people watching this may have been there themselves.
What, the Christian Resources Exhibition?
No, it's for writers. It's similar to that, but it's for writers in September. So everyone in the writing world and the Christian world are there, publishers, writers, etc. I go every year and I absolutely hate it because no one understands why I'm there. I don't get any interest in my books, but I keep persevering, and I've got a friend that nags me and forces me, David, I'll give you a name check, there you go. So we went this year, and again, even though I was showing this, and I had a big poster with the Palestinian flag and all that, people won't engage. Apathy is the thing, not engagement. You know, I'd love to even have a little bit of honest hatred would be good. At least you can have a debate there and other people be drawn in. So anyway, on the second day, up to 30 people were allowed to give a presentation, a 3-minute presentation to the whole lot, like 100 people, no more than 3 minutes. So I was one of them. So they had 20 people, I was number 17. So in those 3-minute presentations, it's like what the books we're doing for Christmas and all that sort of stuff, and little jokes and all that. Well, on mine, I decided to read page 117 of my book, and I'll just read it very quickly. When you see Palestinian flags and pro-Palestinian posters and banners everywhere, in high streets, university campuses, and even Lake District beauty spots, it is not what it seems. It has nothing to do with sympathy for the Palestinians, but all to do with hatred for the Jews. It is not love and sympathy for a beleaguered people, but rather disregard and hatred of eternal pariahs in the world's eyes. Every flag, poster and banner may as well all say the same thing: we hate Jews, or simply feature a single swastika, black on the white circle with a red background. Could be a Nuremberg rally of the Nazi era, or the flags of the Roman legions as they sacked Jerusalem, or the red cross emblems of the Crusaders massacring Jews in their villages on the way to the Holy Land. It's all the same. They all share the same spirit of evil. So I read that out. They all went quiet. And my friends were there and they said, someone behind them whispered, rubbish. No one spoke to me. And this is the interesting thing. No one spoke to me the rest of the day. The next day, individuals were coming up to me, and on the quiet, they were doing like a Nicodemus, you know, seeing Jesus in private, and saying, I agree with what you said. Well done for saying it. Individuals, but they can't do anything about it. Because if they had a church, if they were pastors or ministers, if they started becoming pro-Jewish, they'd lose people. There's a fear. There's a fear. That's why the church is not raising its head above the
They shouldn't have a fear of God rather than a fear of man. And that's where the difference is.
Yeah.
God has the ability to take our souls away at any moment. He has the power of life and death in his hands. You know, what can man do to your soul? He can kill you, but then you go to heaven. So surely there is a great danger that so many of these pastors and others actually fear man and the consequences of man rather than fearing God, which means they don't have a reverence of God. They don't have a Hebrew understanding of who God is and that God is the God of history and he works his purposes out. I mean, probably the kind of classic example, isn't it, is the kind of the book of Esther in the Bible here. The Jewish people were facing annihilation in the ancient Persian Empire because of Haman, and he wanted to kill the Jews. And the Jews at the beginning, certainly Mordecai and Esther, hid their Jewish identity. And by the end of the book, of course, Haman is actually murdered on his own gallows that he created, and also he has to honour Mordecai for saving the coup against the king, and then the Jewish people are then placed in the highest position in the Persian Empire, where it's the fear of the Jews that kept them alive, and they could embrace their Judaism. They can embrace the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And to not understand that, and not to understand kind of history of how God's hand is working through history, but working through nations, and particularly working through the nation of Israel, means you only get a kind of one-dimensional view of God, I believe. And our understanding his heart and his love and his passion for his people, which are the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, as well, essentially do this program and have so many Jewish and Israeli guests on it, because this reflects God's heart for his people to know him, because we know from Book of Revelation is when they get it, they'll turn the world upside down like the early church did as well. So surely more Christians should be brave and courageous in this fight against evil, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's evil, and we see with these Islamists this absolute fundamental hatred of Israel and the Jews, and yet that same hatred consumed the Nazis to commit what they did. And what happened to the Nazis?
I think the question of the Jews in Israel is how the church is going to be judged, basically. And I think it's probably a start. And I think with the Archbishop going down, I think denominations are going to be judged. And I think the only true churches are the grassroots. That's what I believe. I think that's what's happening. And these pastors who will not support Israel. In fact, Tony Pierce, who was with you earlier, that's the only church I've been to that has an Israeli flag in the window. And he's in the Jewish area and openly pro-Jewish. You just don't see that. Some have. I've been to churches that have, but very much a minority. And yet, you think, we're just part of the same family. The Jews is like the older brother of the church. Where is the love? Where's the love that should flow from that? Rather than nourishing or respecting and revering your older relation. Instead, you're saying, no, we've replaced you. You're not in, Father is not interested in you anymore. We're the new people. And to be sucked into that, which is an absolute proven heresy from the first century, absolutely, and yet still around 2,000 years afterwards, just shows you how anti-Semitism still needs to be dealt with in the church.
But do you also think it's the fact that a lot of Christians and pastors haven't come into direct contact with Jewish people? Because when you befriend Jewish people and you make friends with them, they are the most incredible people you're ever going to meet.
No.
And the generosity is incredible. Right. Their understanding of so many things, not only in society, but biblically, politically, gives you a completely different insight into everything.
It's funny because you have to say that because I'm Jewish. I can say, I've met plenty of Jews that don't fit that category. I think in the 20th century, the three big thinkers of the 20th century, all Jewish, and look what they brought: Karl Marx, Freud, and Einstein. So Jews bring blessings and curses. It's just that Jews are touched in some way, and it doesn't mean that we're extra holy. And I know you've met some really great. I know, and so have I. And there's some lovely Jewish people, but I've met, just in my own family, there's the underside of it as well. So that's why I try to say I just don't like being put on a pedestal personally.
Yeah, but this is not so much about you, but this is really about the kind of church coming to a biblical understanding of God's plans and purposes for Israel and the Jewish people, and how as Christians we have to love the Jewish people and also recognise that Israel is there not by human design but by God's design and God's prophetic time clock, and that He's working His purposes out in this nation throughout the nations of the world. And I mean, we only have to, for example, discuss this new current Labour government that's in power at the moment and its approach to Israel. It's certainly taking a more hostile position than the previous Conservative government. And look at our country. It's in a mess. It's in a mess economically. It's in a mess spiritually. And look at the incredible storms that we've seen over the last few months, because this nation under this government is coming against God's plans and purposes with His people Israel, and it's bringing a curse on us because we don't understand what it says in Genesis 12, 1-3, that I will bless those who bless you and I will curse those who curse you. So either a nation, we bless Israel, or we curse Israel. If we bless Israel, we'll be blessed, and we curse Israel, we'll be cursed.
But
it's as simple as that.
Because you've mentioned the curses, but think of the blessings that just over the last year, Iran sends over a barrage of missiles twice, and how many Jews get killed? I mean, it's unprecedented. What they did with Hezbollah and the pages, what other group of people would be clever enough to do that? There's some things that you think, one day you can see there's going to be a film of all this, just like with the raid on Entebbe, how that all came through. That for me, to show the blessings as well as the curses, it's two sides to it, and both of them point to God. And yet the church doesn't get it. And what do you need to do for the church to get it? I don't know.
Well, you're doing something by finding creative ways to engage people on this topic that are not naturally in tune. I'd say the vast majority of viewers are fully in tune with this. but others who are not, are just nominal church members, have no understanding of this. So show us how through creative ways, whether it's through media or in your case through books and creative writing, can actually capture someone's heart and really kind of tell them that God's truth and heart for Israel and the Jewish people, particularly as this is the new battle that's been drawn up between Israel and the rest of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's never been as clear as it is now, because we've also got satellite TV and social media and all that, so no one can escape from it. No one can not see what's going on. You know, it's everywhere. So you can't be, I mean, the last words of the book is get off the fence. You've got to go be on that side or that side. And the one thing that you know with Christians, I've worked with a lot of intercessors in my time, and you will not find an intercessor, a proper intercessor, who doesn't pray for Israel and the Jewish people. So an intercessor is the front line, and they know God's heart. So if they're praying for Israel and the Jewish people, you know that's in God's heart. So that should point to the church. You know, here are the intercessors who spend, you know, think of Rees Howell, you know, that fantastic testimony that he had, and plenty more like him. There's just so many pointers, and that's why we have to think there's such a spiritual blindness. It's not, anti-Semitism is not logical, neither is the spiritual blindness that the church is under. And it may well be that we should pray for some significant leaders of the church to come through, and then the rest is coming down like dominoes.
We've got about a minute and a half left, so not long. Okay. But how can anyone watching this program today, who's watching this program and getting angry and irate because there's a spirit of Jew hatred within their hearts, they might have inherited this from down a family line. How do they kind of respond to that and ask for forgiveness with that?
Well, they've got to get down on their knees and pray, and just ask God to bring to the mind just maybe one thing that they've done that they can deal with, and then start from small, work your way up, I think. But every Christian, you're either on one side or the other side.
Steve, absolute pleasure having you on the Middle East Report today. Thank you, and well done for all these books. And I want to thank you for watching today. I think it's imperative that not only do we read Steve's book, which is called Now Everything Changes, maybe give this as a present to other church members who don't understand Israel, so they can read a novel and understand God's purposes and plans for Israel and the Jewish people. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.